have the Romans ever done for us?
Hi, and welcome to the Ancient History Hound podcast. My name's Neil, and you can find me on Twitter at ancientblogger and find lots of ancient history content on my website, ancientblogger.com. This is a special episode as I'm joined by L.J. Trafford, who's the author of Palatine, Galba's Men, Otho's Regret, and Vitellius's Feast. These books are set in ancient Rome, and specifically in the turmoil of AD 69, what's otherwise known as the Year of the Four Emperors. LJ has recently had a new book published titled How to Survive in Ancient Rome. This is set in AD 95 and explores what Rome would have been like for a visitor or average Roman living there. In this episode, I'll be quizzing LJ over AD 69, what life was like at the end of the 1st century AD in Rome, and how it feels to be a fully paid up member of the Emperor Domitian fan club. So, hello LJ, and welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thank you. Can't think of a better way to spend a Friday night.
No, well, you have got wine, so life is good. So I've mentioned about what you've done, and you've written a number of books. The obvious question to start then is, how did you get into writing about Roman history?
Well, I first got into Roman history as such when I was at sixth form and I was doing my A-levels, and I was doing A-level English Lit, and they make you, in the UK, they make you do Shakespeare by force. So I did 2 Shakespeare plays, I did Much Ado About Nothing, and I did Antony and Cleopatra. And being quite swotty, I thought, well, I'll read round the subject of Antony and Cleopatra, and I'll read about the historic characters in it. And the villain, the baddie in Antony and Cleopatra, is Octavius Caesar. And I was quite surprised when I read up about him to find out that he became the good Emperor Augustus. And that set me off on a kind of mystery, because I do love a mystery and I do love solving a mystery. So I started reading about Augustus, and I started off actually with historical fiction. So I started off with the likes of I Claudius and the Alan Massey books. And this was the early 90s, so there wasn't a great deal of Roman historical fiction around then. It was quite sparse, so I was forced to read things like Ben-Hur and Quo Vadis, which are very dull and very long. And then I moved on. I kind of moved on from the historical fiction. I started reading Suetonius and Tacitus and Livy and Josephus, and it kind of got to the point where I was drawing out the Claudian dynasty using PowerPoint family tree, which is very complicated. That I thought maybe it's, all that interbreeding, all that intermarriage, and I kind of thought maybe I should study this subject. Um, so I had to kind of talk my way onto a degree course because I'd neglected to take a history A level, or indeed a history GCSE. In fact, I dropped history age 13. So I wrote a supporting statement, which was basically just kind of fangirling over Augustus, and that kind of got me onto a degree course. So that's when my interest in Roman history came about. In terms of writing it, I tried many books. I started many books and never finished them. Palatine is the only first book I actually managed to finish writing. And I think it probably helped that I didn't know that much about 69 AD before I began writing it. I knew a bit. I knew who the emperors were, but how the whole idea came about was reading the Gwyn Morgan book on the Year of the Four Emperors, which is very good. And there's a point in 69 AD in January where Galba is emperor, and he hears that the Praetorians have declared Otho emperor. And there's a big debate about what they should do. And the debate is whether he should go down to the forum to appeal to the masses, or whether they should hold the palace by arming the imperial slaves. And it was a kind of ping moment in my head, because I thought, oh, I wonder what those slaves were thinking. And then you start thinking, well, what are they thinking? Whose side are they on? Are they on Galba's side? Are they on Otho's side? Or are they on the emperor before? Are they on Nero's side? And that started off a whole load of questions in my head that I kind of wanted to answer. And they're sort of good characters to have, the kind of slaves and ex-slaves of the palace, because they're there in the middle of the action. So they're good witnesses if you're going to write fiction. They're seeing everything. Who went with Nero when he fled from Rome? He took his freedmen with him. So that was how I kind of came to write the series, and kind of each book had a kind of question that I wanted to answer through it. So the second one was, if Galba arrives in Rome in October 68 and he's dead by January, what the hell happened? No, I wanted to kind of explore questions like that. And so that kind of propelled me through 4 books because I wanted to know what happened. I wanted to see which of my characters were going to survive or not survive, or how they were going to survive in these kind of desperate situations that they kept finding themselves in. Yeah, I mean, it's perfect year for fiction because the set pieces are there for you already. So if you're writing it, you've got the set piece there, and you've just got to write up to it. You know that an emperor's going to fall. You know there's going to be a battle, so you've just got to kind of write your way to there. So it's kind of lazy for a fiction writer because I don't have to make much up about events, but the characters, which is kind of handy because there's not, if you're taking like a Friedman of kind of Nero's, they'll get like 3 lines in the historical record. So I've got kind of the license to create a whole life for them around that and say, well, yeah, they were married. Yeah, they had kids. Yeah, they look like this because there's nobody to contradict me. Whereas Nero, we know what Nero looked like. We know what Nero said. So I've got to keep to it quite closely.
I always think when someone says Nero, I think of Ustinov.
Yeah, I just did when you said it. When I think of Nero, it popped in my head.
We can find you on social media, can't we?
Yes, you can follow me on Twitter, which is just at Trafford LJ, and I'm on Facebook somewhere.
I've got a question actually about your Twitter because I found you on Twitter from Phallus Thursday.
Yeah, my proudest achievement.
It's hashtag Phallus Thursday, and you can tell 2 things from the hashtag that are true. I wondered though, why not Phallus Friday?
Oh, yeah, there's an explanation for this. Because how it came about, it's basically a Twitter hashtag dedicated to depictions of penises in antiquity. Because it just amuses me, and what amuses me is the gap between what was something that was so everyday to your ancient Roman that it's just everywhere. You wear it around your neck, it's on a bracelet, it's on the wall, it's an everyday image to them. And what we see, which is just the kind of mind blown. So I enjoy that gap in perception between their perception and our perception. So there's a kind of vague academic element to it. It's just not knob
It's
gags.
art.
Oh, it's art. There are some knob gags, but it's art, it's culture. So it's Phallus Thursday because I got too excited because I randomly, having had a bad day at work, just posted a picture of some kind of winged phalluses, and it turned out to be really popular. I thought, oh, I could do a hashtag about this. And then I needed something vaguely alliterative, and I got too excited and I couldn't wait for Friday, so it was Phallus Thursday. So that's why. That's why. And it's surprisingly popular every
It
week.
is very popular.
It's very popular.
What we're going to do now, if that's okay, is start with AD 69 because your books cover that period. Could you give a sort of general overview, and then we can look at the runners and riders, as it were, for the 4 emperors?
Yeah, certainly. So my book Palatine isn't actually set in 69, it's 68, which is a year before the year of the 4 emperors. And that's because that's when Nero falls. So in 68, Nero had been on the throne for 14 years and he looked very secure. There was nothing that would make you think he's about to be kicked off. And there's a guy called Vindex who's in one of the Gallic provinces, and he kicks off a rebellion against him. And he writes to the various provincial governors for support, and they all ignore him, apart from a couple of notable exceptions. And they send all their letters to Nero and pledge allegiance to him, with a couple of notable exceptions. One of whom is Galba, the governor of Spain. Now, Nero doesn't take this revolt very seriously at all. He sees no threat from it. He takes it so unseriously that at a meeting he calls where they're meant to be discussing this very serious revolt, he gets overexcited because his water organ has been delivered, and he spends the whole meeting showing off his water organ to these senators who've come up for this discussion and playing tunes for them, which is why you should always write about Nero in fiction because you don't need to make these things up. That's a genuine story.
Could you invent anything that Nero did that people wouldn't believe?
No, no, because he's just brilliant. Because he wanders around the palace in a dressing gown with a kind of a scarf tied round his neck and slippers, and he's just 100% brilliant because nothing has to be invented. It's all true, and kind of nothing is invented in Palatine. It's all true, because you just don't need to make these things up.
But when you sort of subject hopping, as I do for my podcast, I did one on the Olympics, and he won the wreath, as it were, at the Olympic Games. Normally, there were several types of chariot races. He decided that the whole 4-horse thing, nah, you can do better than that. He had a 10-horse race. So 10 horses on a chariot, and he came off several times, but still managed to win. And you could just imagine the kind of his competitors who obviously were terrified to win, and the amount of panic there must have been with all of those horses and all those people trying not to let the horses run and overtake and just go where they wanted to go, which was probably nowhere near Nero. So yeah, he's certainly one of the more interesting characters in antiquity, and needless to say, he's been covered a lot.
He's been covered. He's kind of, by this point, he has lost touch of reality somewhat. And there's people around him who are his kind of freedmen and his advisors, and they're creating this reality for him where he's a successful chariot driver, where he's a successful singer, where he's a successful poet. They're creating this around him. So it's not really surprising he's kind of lost the plot a bit. But he's very clear that Vindex will be defeated. But something happens, and we don't know what, but he starts to lose confidence, and it gets worse and worse. I mean, Vindex is pretty easily defeated. He's beaten by a general called Virginius, really quite comprehensively, very quickly. But in Rome, he's starting to lose that confidence in himself. And then you get this guy who enters the scene who basically is instrumental in his downfall, which is Nymphidius Sabinus, and he's one of the Praetorian guards. And he's got an interesting background himself, but he's got a very palace background. He's the son of a palace prostitute, and his grandfather is Callistus, who was Caligula's secretary, who may or may not have been involved in his assassination. And he's one of the key freedmen under Claudius as well, who gets a mention. So he's got this kind of background, and he's the one who turns the troops against Nero, his own guard. So Nero wakes up one morning and he's on his own. The guards have all deserted him, and what to do, and he ends up fleeing Rome, and the Senate then declare him a enemy of the state, and he ends up committing suicide with his freedmen by his side. So Galba is effectively emperor then, and he arrives in Rome in 68 AD, and he's decapitated in the Forum on the 15th of January 69. So that's gone pretty badly, pretty quickly, which will
We've all had tough weeks.
we've had tough weeks, yeah.
I'm interested in a lot of these characters. I think one of the many values you bring to this conversation is that having that artist understanding of people, what they look like. When I see Gulba, type in his name in a search engine of your choice, you'll just invariably come across a coin. How did you find him in terms of how did he look to you, knowing what you knew about him?
Well, very handily, Suetonius wrote a nice description of him for me, which is always good. So we know he was bald. He was 73, so he was quite elderly, if you like, when you come to the throne. And he was very bald. He had blue eyes and a hooked nose, according to Suetonius. And he's got terrible gout, so his hands and his feet are quite distorted by gout. And he can't wear a shoe for long. He can't unroll a book or even hold a book because his hands are so deformed. So he's quite elderly, but that kind of hook nose. He's very stern, is Golber. I mean, there's one word to describe him, it's stern or old school. He'd had a very distinguished career in the administration. He'd served various emperors. There's claims after Caligula was assassinated that the throne was offered to Golba because he was such good emperor material, but he turned it down. And Agrippina the younger once made a pass at him, but he turned it down. And Tacitus has that great line about him that everyone said he had the makings of a ruler had he never ruled. So he's the guy that on paper he's the full deal. He should have been a great emperor. He had the background, the training, the discipline. He should have been great. So the fact that he dies so quickly is a shock. And it's all down to one man, really. I mean, you can look at what mistakes Golba made. He didn't pay the Praetorians what they felt they were deserved. He was very harsh. Coming into the city, there was a fracas coming in. He ended up practicing decimation on a legion, which hadn't been done for like 100 years. You can take all these kind of things and say, oh, yeah, he wasn't very good because of that. But if there hadn't been Otho, he would never have been killed, I think. I think he could have lasted longer. But
Okay.
yeah.
So it was more to. You have, by the way, just described Mr. Burns, who I've got in my head as Galba, and so Otho is instrumental. Then he's, in a way, you've got a sort of pattern. The end wouldn't have happened to Nero necessarily if Galba hadn't come along, and likewise, Galba wouldn't have lost if Otho hadn't come along.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's not a kind of predetermined thing. There's lots of kind of little things that happen that lead to the moments that kind of build up to like Otho's coup that happens in January. But Otho was he was one of the other governors that did not declare against Vindex. He was governor of what is now Portugal. He's very unlike Golba. He's much, much younger, and he's quite dissolute. He has quite a reputation. He's a bit Suetonius says he's almost feminine in the care of his person. He was the one who taught Nero how to perfume his feet. You know, he was an instructor in these kind of things. He plucked out all his body hair. He used moist bread to prevent beard growth, and he wore a toupee, which Suetonius claims was so good that nobody knew it was there. But then Suetonius is writing about this quite some decades later, so it clearly wasn't that good. And if you look at the coins, you can kind of see Otho's toupee. So he's very different to Golba. He's much younger. He's in his 30s. Um, but for some reason, he thought Golba was going to adopt him as his heir. He was absolutely set on it, and he borrowed a lot of money and spent a lot of money currying favour around Golba. And when Golba, on a particular day, didn't declare him his heir, he was in quite a position because he had a lot of debt and a lot of people wanting that money back. Um, so he decides he's going to overthrow Golba just like that. Well, he tries to do it a few days before when he actually does, but everybody was too drunk to organise, according to Tacitus. So he waits a few days and tries again. And then on the 15th of January, he he decides to set up this coup, and his his staff gather round some kind of supporters, and his supporters number 23
Ooh.
people. So it's not a great shot, but by the time he gets to Praetorian camp, they've doubled their numbers to 46. Still not a lot of people, and the Praetorians are quite bemused when he turns up and says, I'm going to be emperor, but they go with it. And there's an absolute bloody massacre in the forum, and it all kicks off. As Tacitus says, when killing starts, it's difficult to draw the line. And this is not a battle, this is just a massacre. And Golba is decapitated, and everybody around him is decapitated, and Otho is emperor.
These were all his supporters then, presumably, as well. It was just an outright, let's say, purge of any loyalty to Galba.
Yeah, because Galba had some advisors, and the ones that were in the forum, obviously in the bloody massacre, were gone. There's a guy called Isolus who is freedman and also his lover, and he was crucified, which he shouldn't have been because he was a freedman, and as a freedman, you're safe from crucifixion. But it's a kind of year when all the old rules are just thrown away. So you see these kind
Yeah.
of these traditions, these laws, these things which should be set in stone, just not being set in stone. So yes, it was a purge, and then Otho got up to the palace and looked at the correspondence and discovered that Vitellius had been declared emperor in Germany 2 weeks beforehand and was marching with 20,000 men to Rome to claim his throne. And he had no
Oh,
idea. It's a real oops. It's a real oops moment. He had absolutely no idea. And he'd just become emperor and realised he was facing another emperor, which is a dreadful moment for him, I imagine.
yeah. Yeah, that's not the greatest timing. Did he have much way in the support of troops?
Otho had very little because the legions weren't near him. They had to travel because, obviously they're in their provinces, they're not around him. So he kind of puts together this kind of ramshackle army as quickly as he can. Because another one of those kind of what if moments is it's a very mild winter.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Vitellius's troops can move a lot faster than usual. The snows have melted, so they move quicker than expected. So he has to muster together an army as quickly as he can. And it's made up of the Praetorian Guard, who've not necessarily been in battle recently. It's made up of eager recruits, and it's made up of gladiators because he's that desperate, So there's a gladiator army in there as well.
When you're fighting the Roman army of the middle of first century AD, you've got to get it right. And if you've got troops coming from, you say Germany, or Upper Germany, that part of the world,
Yeah, they're the Rhine legions. They're the Upper and Lower Germany legions that are being marched down by two of Vitellius's generals, who are Valens and Caecina. And they're marching down separately, and they're going to contravene, meet up when they get to Rome. When they get to Italy, they're meant to meet and form one massive army.
and that's the last thing you want to hear.
Yeah. Yes.
It's one of those problems you have if you're ever in charge of an army. You become really popular and you go to Rome. It's where are your men?
Mm.
How can you access them? So you've got Vitellius coming in on the scene. What about him? What's he like?
He is grotesque, according to all our sources.
Oh,
He
don't
is.
hold back.
I'm not gonna. This is what they say. I'm just repeating it. He's extraordinarily fat, and he has a huge belly, according to Suetonius, and he drinks, and he's so greedy that he once nicked sacrificial meat off the flames. You get these kind of stories, and
We've
he
all been there.
we've all been there, and he banquets day and night, and he develops a dish called I think it's a shield of Minerva, which has food from every bit of the empire, and this huge dish of food. So he's greedy, basically. And he stays in Germany and he lets Valens and Caecina march these armies down. So he waits to see what happens. And then when it's all sorted, he comes and joins them. But Otho surprises everybody because he doesn't do a runner. And for someone who's such a dandy and so supposedly feminine, because he cares about his appearance, he makes a stand, and he has some successes against Vitellius. These gladiator army are quite good at kind of picking them off.
Where are they fighting? Is it northern Italy?
It's northern Italy, yeah, northern Italy.
Okay.
They meet up with them and they pick off enough of his forces, and they have some victories. And Otho, I think what comes out about Otho, he was clearly extremely charismatic and charming. That he manages to put together this army to defeat Galba, to throw this coup, that he manages to hold this army, this ramshackle army of kind of gladiators and praetorians and raw recruits together. And they're absolutely dedicated to him. They would have fought on and on and on for him. And he's the one who says no, who says, stop, I don't want this. I don't want to continue this civil war. And he commits suicide very nobly. The Romans are, in awe of his death because it was so unlike his life, that he took a stand and said, I don't want civil war. I'm going to kill myself. And that was the end of Otho, which is admirable.
That holds a lot of the Roman virtues, as you said. It's the noble self-sacrifice. I'm quite impressed though that they were able to hold the Roman forces at bay. And he's committed suicide at Rome, or
In the field, in northern Italy.
okay, right. So he's actually there with the troops.
He's there with the troops, and he was buried. He was buried there in a tomb which Plutarch describes, that was obviously still there for some years. But yes, he dies. I mean, they had, I think Caecina, who's who they faced, marching down his troops, they get a bit cocky. The Rhine legions. They know they're the best of the best, and they get a bit cocky. And there's a notorious siege of Placentia, which is my favourite all-time siege because it's such a cock-up, which is being held by the Euphonians, and it's a guy called Spurinna, and he's got raw recruits and he's got praetorians. He's not got much of a force, and they're holding this town. And Caecina, who is described as being tall and good-looking, and is he brings his troops down, and he's got this massive army, and they all get cocky, and they decide to try and besiege Placentia after what Tacitus says is some good food and some good drink. So basically they turn up plastered, and they turn up plastered having forgotten to bring any siege equipment with them. And so they just kind of, and they've gone a bit kind of native as well. I mean, Caecina's Roman, he's not been in Germany for long, but he started wearing plaid trousers
Shock horror.
and a cloak, and he's 6 foot of man hunk in these kind of trousers and a cloak, and his recruits, his army, start fighting bare chested
Okay.
and kind of singing German war songs. So for the guys in Placentia, these kind of praetorians and raw recruits, it must have been pretty damn scary. But they just turned up without any siege equipment and just kind of had a go, had a go at kind of conquering it.
It does feel a bit Monty Python.
It does, yeah. And they had to go off, and they did have another go. They went off and they rebuilt. They went and built some siege equipment, presumably with horrible, horrible hangovers, and came back the next day. And they still couldn't. They still couldn't break Placentia. So they should have done. As you say, on paper, they're the trained army. They should have wiped them out, but they don't because they get too cocky. And Caecina's comes across as a bit of an idiot on certain occasions, such as this one.
I wonder at what point anyone realised there was no siege equipment.
I think they got overexcited. I think they realised kind of en route and just went, oh, we can do it. We're the Rhine Legion. We can do it. They're just kids.
Because it's not like you forget your keys.
Yeah.
If you get there and need your keys, you think, the table. Oh, yeah, they're by the remote control. Whereas siege equipment, quite substantial pieces of kit. How you would have got there and gone, that thing we were meant to bring, the one thing we were meant to bring. Oh, I forgot it. Hey, let's just drink and shout at the walls.
It shows the kind of inexperience of Cassino, who's only in his 20s, and he's said to be a very good speaker. So he's very good at railing them up and giving great speeches that get them all excited and ready to fight. But the kind of practicalities are not within his reach on this occasion, unfortunately.
So we have Vitellius. He's on the way down, and he's presumably he gets word that Otho's killed himself. He's got a clear line then.
Yep, he's got a clear line, so they mass, the forces mass, and they come down to Rome, and he's emperor, sitting in Rome quite happily. And then he hears in the summer, and I think what you've got to bear in mind with this, these all sound very linear, but lots of things happen at the same time, and communication takes time in the ancient world.
Yeah, absolutely.
It takes days or months. So, for example, Vespasian sends his son Titus to go meet Emperor Galba, and Titus gets to Corinth before he finds out that Galba's actually dead.
Mm.
So these kind of things are happening at the same time, and people aren't aware what each other are doing. Like Otho was not aware that Vitellius had been declared emperor. So I think that's always worth bearing in mind when thinking about kind of events. There's a delay. People don't know what's happening in the other part of the empire until months after it's happened.
It's one of those things that we're so normalized to instant communications. So now you've got the fourth and final emperor on the scene. No spoilers. And that brings us, I suppose, to Vespasian. And how does Vespasian? Do you think he's always been biding his time, or how's he been doing things?
Well, I guess we've got to bear in mind that anything about Vespasian is kind of later propaganda, a lot of it, how he's kind of portrayed, because obviously he's the one who succeeds, and so people are there writing his history. But when Titus got to Corinth and found Galba was dead, I mean, Vespasian was going to declare for Galba. When he found out Galba was dead, they went back to the east and they bided their time to see what would happen between Otho and Vitellius. So to wait, who was the winner of that one, whilst kind of building up what they were going to do in the East. So they kind of sit it out for a bit. But it doesn't go their way either, because the idea that they'd got was that they were going to stop the grain ships going
Yeah.
to Rome and starve Vitellius, and he would surrender, and that was what's going to happen, and there wouldn't have to be a big battle, and it would all be great. But there's a general called Primus who's not one of Vespasian's generals, but he suddenly declares for him, and he gets a bit overexcited and decides, oh, he's going to take on Vitellius and invades Italy, and then it all kicks off. So the plan that they had didn't really come to happen. So there's this kind of rogue force in Primus who were fighting for Vespasian, but Vespasian's got no control over them. He doesn't know what he's doing. They've just got to see what happens. So it doesn't go all his way either.
So he's pulled into the war, really.
Yeah, so he sends on one of his generals, Mucianus, ahead, who's trying to catch up with Primus to kind of, to kind of slow him down a bit, I guess. But yeah, but then it's all happening in Rome, and there's a battle for Rome, and obviously Vitellius is defeated at one point. But I mean, Vitellius tries to abdicate. He decides he gets talked round, and he decides he's going to abdicate, but his troops won't let him.
Where was he planning on heading out to?
I think they kind of give him some kind of deal that he could go off to some nice villa by the seaside, and there'd be money, and it would be fine, and you sit it out. It's Vespasian's brother, who's called Flavius Sabinus, who's in Rome at this time, and he does the kind of negotiations and says, look, abdicate. This army's coming. Abdicate. You don't really want this, do you? You've been talked into it by Valens and Caecina. You don't really want it. And he tries to abdicate, but his troops, these Rhine legions again, won't let him.
Where is Vespasian at this time? He's out in the east, and I presume he was active in. I know he was active in Judea at one point.
Yes.
Is that where he is?
Yes, that's where he is. He's been fighting the Jewish war. There's been a war that's been going on, a fairly brutal war that his son Titus is also involved in. So he's been doing that. So he's out in the east, and he's there for quite a long time. So he's not actually, when I wrote my books, I don't actually have Vespasian in it at all, because I'm only doing 68 and 69. So you hear lots of talk about him, but you never actually meet him, because he's the guy that's not there. And we kind of assume he was there because he's the winner. We assume he was there in 69. He wasn't. He didn't pop into Rome till towards the end of 70. So he wasn't there at all. He's a bit kind of, he's absent.
And he brings back Josephus with him.
Brings back Josephus, indeed, yeah.
We've now moved to the point where we've got Vespasian in play. And the question I was going to ask you was, we've spoken largely about Romans fighting Romans. Was there any danger that any other, I call them tribes, factions, anything non-Roman, were looking on and going, "Oh, hang on a sec, perhaps we could, tidy things up a bit here and, sack a town or two, or even launch some form of invasion"?
There's various kind of revolts that are going on at the time that Tacitus covers a bit. There's some going on in Germany, and I think there's some in Britain. Is it Civilis? There's a revolt there, so there's stuff going on that has to be mopped up afterwards. So yes, there are external forces kind of looking in, and there's a lots of other stuff happening again at the same time. So whilst they're kind of trying to sort out who's emperor, there's also stuff going on in the provinces that needs sorting out as well. So yeah, it's one big mess, is what it is.
Did you find it particularly enjoyable, or was it one of those writing processes that you like much more after doing it all?
I think writing any book is hard, and it's just a hard slog. It's always a hard slog. Um, but yeah, I wanted to find out what happened because I didn't really know much about 69, like I said. So I wanted to kind of get to the end and work out, how who succeeded and why, and which of my characters were going to survive and why. And it's such a rich year for just fiction because there's so many big battles and massacres and political infighting and backstabbing, literal backstabbing, and possible poisonings. And it's just rich, and I really wanted to write about it. I mean, we've talked a bit about 69, quite a lot about 69, and I've left a lot out. I'm sure there's people screaming, going, "But what about this battle? You haven't mentioned that." I know, because there's too much stuff.
You have mentioned the Drunken
The
Siege,
Drunken Siege, yeah.
and Narnia we should mention as well,
Yeah, Narnia.
because Narnia is referenced a few times.
It's where the Emperor Nerva was from.
We've come to, obviously, Vespasian. Vespasian lasts for about 10 years. Then Titus is on the throne, as it were, for a couple of years. He's not there very long. And this all segues into your book, How to Survive in Ancient Rome, because this is set in AD 95. It would have been the time of Domitian, who was Vespasian's youngest son. Domitian is a divisive character. He's not much admired, but you're someone who thinks that he's had something of an unfair reputation, or he's had a bit of a bad time of it. Make your case. What were the redeeming things about him that you found?
I think he does everything that an emperor should. He builds a lot of stuff. So there's another great fire under Titus in which a lot of buildings are destroyed, and he rebuilds them, including the Temple of Jupiter. He widens the streets, which Martial writes a very nice poem about. He's very pleased about. He builds roads. He builds a forum, which is now called the Forum of Nerva, but was his forum. So he builds. He's one of the biggest builders probably since Augustus. And he also does a lot of good legislation as well. He passes laws against child prostitution. He brings in anti-castration legislation and limits the price of eunuchs so the overseers can't cash in. He brings in morality laws, which again is a very Augustus thing. But Romans are big on kind of family and the proper way to live and this so-called golden age. So he's doing what Romans expect him to in that way. And he's very up on religion. He holds the secular games at the proper number of years interval, because they're meant to be at a set number of years, but Claudius got overexcited and held them too early. But Domitian does it on the exact year that they should have been held. So he's very adhered to religion. He spends a lot of time in public religion. He's very fond of the goddess Minerva, of Jupiter. He builds, great monuments to. He builds a temple to his family, the Temple of the Flavians. Um, he's very big on rooting out corruption. So he kind of does all the things that an emperor should do. I mean, even yes, there is nasty, nasty incident in his reign where Vestal Virgin is buried alive for breaking a vow of chastity. But again, if you look at that from sticking to the official gods and doing what is proper in religion, then he probably sees himself as doing the right thing. So he does all the sorts of things that emperors should do. Um, so that's what I would say is my kind of case for him. I'm just looking down my list. I wrote a big long list of stuff that he's done, and there's lots of kind of great, kind of very sucky up court poetry. that gives you a whole list of the kind of things that he did. He rebuilt the palace on the Palatine. He completely redoes. He builds a stadium. He holds great games. Novel games for the people. He does, he does everything that emperors are meant to do. So I would say that's my kind of defense. But yes, he gets paranoid. But then that's not really surprising when you're emperor because people are out to kill you. People are plotting against you.
I'd say it's healthy. You have to be.
It's a healthy paranoia. It's a when I mean, there's a big deal made about, oh, he executed some senators. But if you look at all the emperors, they do this. Claudius wiped out hundreds of equestrians.
Why do you think then that he does have a bad rap?
Because he gets assassinated, I think, and because your history is written up by your successor, and he doesn't have a kind of straightforward successor, straightforward heir to big him up. I mean, part of his kind of paranoia probably links back to his time in 69 AD because whereas his brother and his father were in the East, Domitian was in Rome in 69 and he was only 18, 19. And he got kind of thrust into this as the son of somebody who's declared himself emperor. And again, as we said about communications, he probably didn't even know. There's a good chance he didn't know this was going to happen, that he didn't know that his father was going to declare himself emperor. So he finds himself under house arrest under Vitellius. And he finds himself in an awful predicament. He's in the middle of a battle that his uncle is fighting, and he has to flee from the Temple of Jupiter, which has been set on fire. And there's this big battle going around him, and he has to hide in the Temple of Isis and disguise himself as a priest to escape with his life. So that's pretty terrifying for like an 18, 19-year-old. And he's then held up as the face of this new dynasty. And it's just him having to, you know, be the face of the Flavians. And he's been there, and his uncle is killed in battle by Vitellius. So he's been there and he's watched these senators swap sides and he's watched the politics go on. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why he's quite so paranoid because he was there and he saw it firsthand. Um, but yeah, I mean, emperors are generally wipe out anyone they see as in their way, including their relatives. That's kind of fairly standard.
It seems like he's had a lot of instances of isolation in his life.
He's quite a solitary person. There's the classic story about Domitian is he spent a lot of time on his own. He liked his own company, and so there's a story going around that when he was on his own, he was stabbing to death flies with his pen. Because they can't imagine why anybody would want to be alone. Rome's a very public place. They couldn't understand somebody who enjoyed solitude. I mean, he'd had a good training as the kind of under his father and his brother. He'd held various positions. He'd been a kind of prince as such. So he had kind of quite good training for it. But yes, I mean, he gets paranoid and he gets increasingly paranoid, which is not surprising when there's kind of plots against him. And you have the famous black banquet where he invites some guests round and everything is black, even the food and the plates. And I think, isn't it the background something like gravestones or something like that? And the slaves are all dressed up as like in black and everybody's absolutely terrified for their lives and that's whether it's his idea of a joke or just to keep them on edge. He kind of likes to keep people on edge. And I mean, if you read kind of like Pliny the Younger, he kind of served Domitian. I mean, he comes across as very scary when he loses his temper. So you've got to have sympathy for these kind of senators as well, because it's a frightening thing. This guy kind of yelling at you and insisting you do this and going red in the face when you don't. Um, but yeah, I mean, his paranoia works against him in the end because he's not assassinated by senators. He's assassinated by his own staff within the palace. It's an internal palace plot. Um, and it's because they feared for their lives because he bumped off a guy called Epaphroditus, who's one of my characters in my books, who was with Nero at the end. He's one of the freedmen with Nero when Nero commits suicide. And this is like, what, 15 years beforehand? And Domitian suddenly decides that Epaphroditus has to die because he was with an emperor and an emperor died and he didn't protect that emperor. So he bumps him off. And then that makes the whole imperial staff suddenly think, oh, we're next. Our lives on the line here. And they conspire and it's them that kill him. It's not the senators. It's the staff. So
I didn't know that.
yes, it's a plot by his chamberlain Parthenius, who Martial writes several poems to. Um, yeah, this is the chamberlain, so he's very high up, and they plot. They don't actually do the deed. They have somebody else do the deed, and they actually don't get discovered for quite a long time, which it had to be quite scary. Nerva is forced to hand them over when there's quite a gap between when Domitian is assassinated and when they get handed over. So, the answer is that nobody knew they were behind it. And so they had essentially got away with it. And then, somebody obviously blabbed, and they have horrible executions at the hand of the soldiers. Nerva is forced to hand them over to the soldiers. But yeah, it was an internal plot.
Wow, I genuinely didn't know about that. I'm quite now fascinated by this sort of black dinner thing.
Oh, look it up, the Black Banquet. Yes, look it up.
And that
Yeah,
brings us, thank you very much, by the way, for all of that. There's just, as you said, there's almost too much
it's
to really
too
understand.
much.
I wonder as well, just one final question on how it went for them. And by that, I'm talking about sort of Flavian, so Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. With the four emperors, or the three emperors that went prior to Vespasian, do you think that stabilized the period after it? Because it's almost as if Rome had to periodically go through some form of bloodshed to vent anything that was going to happen, and then everyone just calms down.
I think it doesn't calm down immediately. I mean, Vespasian, it takes a while for Vespasian's rule to settle. There are plots and things like that. It's not just like, bam, Vitellius is dead, Vespasian's emperor, everything's fine now. It's 70, it's not 69 anymore. There's quite a lot of uncertainty in that. But I mean, the main problem with kind of 69, the lesson was that the armies have the power. The armies make the emperors.
Yeah,
So, it was the army who wouldn't let Vitellius abdicate. It was the generals who encouraged him to go for it. It was them who made Galba emperor. They're the ones with the power. And so they do learn a lesson from this, in that Domitian, raises the pay of the army, and he's very, very popular with the army. After his death, they're probably one of the few groups of people who really mourn him. And similarly, Vespasian makes Titus Praetorian prefect to stop that kind of Nymphidius Sabinus kind of, them bumping off emperors for pay, etc., and to make money. So they do kind of learn lessons from this. But whether it's a kind of Rome needs a purge, it's just there's a dangerous lesson that's learned, that the army actually can be turned against Rome. When
yeah.
the battles between Vitellius and Vespasian's armies in Rome, they're bloody battles in the streets, in the temples, in the porticos. So that's what kind of comes out of 69, is this kind of, and it comes back to bite them in the kind of third century crisis, etc. This power force that is the army.
So thanks very much for that. Lots to say, and then lots to go away and look up. And I'm thinking of, again, water organs and black banquets. Your book, and your latest book, How to Survive in Ancient Rome, which again is out and is a perfect gift for Christmas. I've got mine ordered.
Yay!
It gives you an option of seeing Rome from the view of the common person. Please paint me a scene.
You've seen. It's very crowded. I mean, Rome at its height in the kind of first century had 1 million inhabitants, which is huge for an ancient city. I think London didn't get 1 million till about 1801. And Rome's quite a compact city, so it's very, very crowded. There's lots and lots of people. Juvenal complains about walking down the street and people stepping on your sandal, and people in litters being carried and getting in the way. It's an argy bargy, and it's very noisy as well with that many people, because people live in these apartment blocks, and they live very close together. And Marshall makes the gag about, his neighbor across the street. They can shake hands outside their windows. They're that close together. So you're constantly surrounded by people, even if you're quite well off. Seneca complains about living too close to a bathhouse, and all the noise he can hear, the slapping of the masseur,
I remember that.
the
Yeah,
screaming of the
yeah. And the plucking. He doesn't like people screaming because he thinks that, yeah, people were plucked. If you don't know much about Roman baths, again, here's a chance for a plug for a podcast and a pun for a plug for a podcast. I did a whole thing on Roman baths, and it is very interesting. The stuff that goes on in baths is not quite what you might imagine, and I'm looking at you, Marshall, because he has lots to say about what goes on in baths, which I won't repeat here. But yeah, they were noisy places. Would it have been noisy at night?
It was worse because they'd got this rule to stop it being so crowded. that wagons delivering goods couldn't go through the daytime, couldn't go through the city during the day. So they went all through the night. So people kind of delivering food, etc., happened all night long. So I think Juvenal again has a line about insomnia kills many of us. So it was really noisy, and a lot of business in Rome is done outside. Schools are done outside, so you can hear, the teachers making them repeat whatever they're learning outside. So everything's on the street, so it's a very noisy place. It's also probably the smells as well from that many people that close together. The perfume, the overbearing perfume. You get complaints about kind of the smell of cinnamon from people's perfumes offending people, and all the food stalls outside as well, the smell of that. So it's kind of noisy, crowded, loud, and smelly, I would imagine. That would probably be what kind of shocked us first of all, I would think.
I read a paper or an article rather, by Alex Scobie, and it was all about the slums and sanitation in Rome, and it just wasn't pleasant. He wrote that there was lots of dog excrement, there was lots of human excrement, there was just lots of every type of excrement. One of the reasons that I did the podcast on the Roman baths was because I was interested to think, how did the Romans perceive the baths? And I can imagine that if you were someone living in one of those insulae, you lived in a very small building, you were surrounded by cramped conditions, you could go somewhere where it had running water, you could go and exercise in the baths, you could do all sorts. Perhaps the only type of open space in your area that you might have access to. And it would have been a real boon to anyone who was living in those kind of conditions. You can see why they were so popular. And people used to go to the baths, not just to bathe, just to go to the baths. I suppose it's a bit like the local park in a built up area. It becomes a place where people can get away from what must have been a really quite corrosive environment at times. I should add, by the way, I'm talking about the public baths. There were obviously smaller baths as well, private owned baths, and they are sometimes luxurious, a bit like pubs or bars. Some of them are sort of dive bars, and others are really expensive, get a little napkin under your drink type bars as well. So the baths were a bit like that, but I'm talking about obviously the public baths. So we've thought then that it would have been very noisy and very smelly. Whereas what would you be doing of a day in ancient Rome?
Probably some shopping, that sort of thing. You might go do some entertainment.
Oh,
Maybe you go off to the games and sit, take a nice cushion, sit in the right seat because it's all heavily demarcated according to class. So, you need to know where your seats are. The posh seats are at the front for the senatorial class, and the slaves and the women are at the back. So you might do that. Like you say, you might go to the baths. You might have a job even that you do. It's just like now, really, in a way. You feel entertainment, work, leisure, go to the temple, might be a good festival on you can take part in with a banquet afterwards.
Pliny the Younger wrote lots of letters around this time, and he's often talking about the amount of poetry recitals that go on. People,
Oh God, yeah. That he puts on. Yeah.
yeah, not that I'd ever want to go to them. No, no. But he's saying, oh, it's Rome's such a flourishing place for the arts. You've got philosophers to come and talk, and the sorts of
Yeah.
things that you think you should do,
Yeah.
but you never do. I suppose the ancient Roman version of the gym, yeah, I'll go, but you never do. You might go and hear a particular speech or an oration from a Greek philosopher, but really, you want to go to the games, or you might want to go and see a bawdy play or something.
Yeah, dinner parties are very the thing. I mean, Marshall writes endless poems about dinner parties and trying to get an invite to the top dinner party, and why isn't he get invited? And is it all manner of reasons why he doesn't get invited? When he does get invited, then he invariably complains about the food, the wine, the host, and you kind of think, yeah, that's why you don't get invited, because you just complain about it.
Yeah, he complains about people hanging around the baths just to get invites to dinner, but is doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah, I.
Is the same thing himself. Is okay. He also wrote about how people would go to the baths just to work up a thirst. There was obviously not nightlife as we understand it. There was just lots of noise. When were people stopping doing things? When did people say, "Okay, too late for us. We'll go to bed now"?
Um, I guess the lighting situation plays a part in this. because obviously there's no electricity. So when it's dark, it's very dark. I mean, there were cook shops that people went to kind of after dark and things like that, and there were bars. But I get it's difficult, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, dinner parties, you've got oil lamps, etc., etc., so they could go into the night. But you don't really want to be wandering around on the streets of Rome after dark.
No,
Juvenal's quite clear on that. He's like, before you go out after dark, write your will. It's a dangerous city. You
blimey.
don't, unless you've got like a mob with you and some sturdy slaves, you don't want to be wandering around after dark. I mean, the Roman day starts at kind of sunrise and finishes at sunset, and whatever time of year it is. So obviously the days are shorter in winter, so they change the length of the hour so they can fit in 12 hours. So an hour in summer is longer than an hour in winter.
Is there anything else in terms of the areas you're? But I'm thinking about the amount of things you cover in your book. What are the sorts of topics that you go into?
Oh, I look at pretty much every it's a good general introduction to ancient Rome. So it's packed full of facts. So I cover things like housing, so the accommodation, whether you be rich or poor, the food, whether you be rich or poor, what you might be eating, religion, the types of gods, what you do to venerate them, sacrifices, festivals, what kind of festivals you might attend, medicine, we look at medicine and health. That's one chapter as well. I'm gonna have to flick through now, I'm forgetting. There's about 14 different topics in it, so it's quite well covered.
So you cover a lot of different areas, and how did you meet that opportunity?
I was approached by Pen and Sword, who the publisher. I was approached via Twitter actually, by one of their commissioning editors who said they had a project. Would I be interested in it? So I went, yeah, all right. So this is a series. There's various how to survives in various different periods in history. There's one how to survive in ancient Greece and one how to survive in ancient Egypt. And I happened to do the Roman one. So they gave me a list of topics and kind of questions they wanted me to answer, and said, you've got 50,000 words, go. Um, so it covers, yeah, all kinds of things like the social class and the family and pets and just every single politics, every single aspect, law and order as well, every single aspect of kind of ancient Rome. So it's kind of dense with facts. It's obviously very different to writing fiction, in that everything has to be checked and everything has to be correct. But it's good in a way because you get to show off your research, because you get to do endnotes and you can go, yes, I did read, and a bibliography. So you can go, yes, I did read all these books. Yes, yes, this is true. Yes, I did do, I did check this. Yes, I did research that, which is good because in fiction, people quite often think you make stuff up that's absolutely true. And unless you put it in the author's note, they'll never know how much research you had to do. So it's a different discipline. Um, it's equally as hard, but for different reasons than writing fiction, I think.
Are there any particular facts that, obviously, again, I don't want to give away too much. Are there any sort of standout things that you found and you just went, huh, okay, much like I reacted to Nero's water organ?
Yeah, I do love the pet eels. Pet eels. People were very into having pet eels, and Crassus took it one step further, and he would dress his pet eels as lovely maidens in necklaces and jewels, which does
Wow.
beg the question someone put on Twitter the other day: how do you put a necklace on a creature that doesn't
Yeah.
have a neck? And there is no answer to this, which makes it even more intriguing. But he was devoted this year. He trained it to come up and feed from his hand, and like we say, decorated it with jewels. But
That's something that I remember from Petronius Satyricon, the Feast of Trimalchio,
mm,
which is a lampoon of someone who has got no real taste, and he brings out this massive eel, and it's just got loads of baubles and jewels attached to it. I think it's Suetonius. He's talking about how Augustus visited someone, and I'm getting the name Pollio in my head,
yes, yeah,
and a slave drops a cup, and he petitions because the punishment for the slave was going to be fed to the eels.
yeah. Are you doing what? Would the eels eat him? I don't know how.
I think, yeah. I thought that's the most sort of James Bond villain way of being killed in antiquity, pretty much. If there's anyone out there who's listening to this is a very niche crossover, but it's possible. And you are an eel trainer, or you are in some way capable of understanding the behaviour of eels, please tweet me and explain whether or not A, you could dress an eel, B, if you can train an eel. Is there another thing, or do you want to keep these cards to your chest?
I do love Pliny the Elder, his natural histories, which is just a treasure trove of all manner of wonderful facts. And he has a whole section on people changing sex, which has the opening line that women have changed into men is not a myth. And then he gives a whole load of examples, and he ends it with the line, I myself saw someone who became a man on his wedding day, which you think is going to be the start of a wonderful anecdote. But that's it. That's it. No further explanation is offered. He does about, I think it's 13 chapters on bees, but he can't do this anecdote justice.
You know who's worse?
He's
Who's worse than that? Livy. Livy is the worst. And Livy is the worst because he has an entire chapter on a law. And then at the end, he'll say, in this year, a child was born with the head of an ox, and lights were seen in the sky outside of a particular town. A statue bled, and a woman was born with the head of a table, and it said moo. It just bizarre stuff, and that's it. Just kills it. One line, and you're thinking, on the balance of things, Livy, I would rather hear about the child with the head of a cow than another sort of 15 lines on someone's speech about a law. I just want to know more. And he puts these right at the end, and it's around the period of time where Hannibal's active in Italy, and the idea is that there's a sort of natural disturbance. But he describes things like, he says there's a flying altar with people. So some people have said, is this a UFO? Is this, an early description UFO? We don't know. But there's all sorts of things that are going on. He just throws a bunch of things at the wall. It's wolves stealing things, statues bleeding, all sorts. And it just gives you,
good omens. Good
yeah,
omens.
just come on, a bit more, please.
Yeah. No, I like it just because there is no anecdote, there is no story. It's just I saw someone change sex at their wedding. I mean, nothing about the argy-bargy that followed at the reception. Nothing. That's it. That's it. That's the story.
It must have been really frustrating to know him, because he would come out with it and be, yeah, and he'd be just walked off. That's it. No,
That's it. Yeah.
no,
That's my
no more.
story. Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
No
Cheers,
more.
just that. Thanks. Well, we've come to the point now where earlier this week, or the last couple of weeks, I put out, and yourself put out, some tweets, messages on social media, and we asked the question, what do you want to know about ancient Rome? The first question, older Romans in the 80s to 90s AD may remember Caligula, Nero, the year of 4 emperors, and now Domitian. Was there a popular sentiment in this period that the emperor, as an office, not an individual, was a bad idea? It's a very good question.
It would be it's kind of difficult to say that it would be a popular sentiment because it's not the kind of thing you'd be able to say publicly because there's treason laws and people get put on trial, particularly under Tiberius, for the most ridiculous things. They don't always get killed.
Oh yeah, the Maestas trials.
Yeah, so you get people who are put on trial for having a coin of Augustus in their pocket when they went to the public loose to have a wee, and that's considered treason. So if there was a popular sentiment, nobody's likely to express it. But if you read Tacitus's annals, you get a feeling the kind of dripping contempt he has for the likes of Augustus is kind of evident. So he's maybe not saying it, but maybe there's a bit of Republican zeal there, and you get this constant harping back to this golden age that all Romans go on about, and they go on about it whatever period they live in, and it's some period in the early Republic before everybody got too wealthy, and that's their kind of golden age. So is that harking back to a Republican era without an emperor? Maybe, but popular sentiment, nobody's likely to say it publicly. I mean, after there was a bit when Caligula was assassinated, where the senators suddenly randomly said, "Oh, we'll restore the Republic," but then Claudius had been found behind a curtain, so that was the end of that idea. So
Well, that was the Praetorians, so
yeah,
that was the playing their hand. Perhaps you're right in that people were looking back to a time that they could never attain to. The next question is, a citizen buys a slave, what documents does he get? Where is the sale registered?
he gets a contract. There's lots of kind of legal cases and laws that talk about proving your ownership of a slave. So whoever you buy the slave from, whether it be a slave seller, you'll get a contract, and the seller will have to will fess up to any defects, any physical defects, any tendency to run away, things like that. And the contract will state like the name of the slave, their price, who's selling them, and a kind of guarantee. A lot of them have kind of guarantees should you be dissatisfied with your purchase, and you get a contract, yeah, with a kind of written guarantee. And then if that slave runs away or something happens to them, you can then prove they're yours and get them back again. So that's essential.
It was a very formalised process then. And I suppose because you were buying the slave from a dealer, as it were,
Mm.
who was based in Rome, they wouldn't want their reputations to suffer.
No, I mean there's lots of dodgy sales that go on. Was it Mark Antony paid a fortune for a set of twins who weren't actually twins, just people who looked kind of alike.
How did he find that out? How did he find that one out?
Who knows? Maybe he brought them when he was drunk, and they went, "Oh," woke up the next morning, "Oh, you're not twins."
The next one is actually a very, very good one because it's one of those questions that does get asked. What entity was charged with what we would describe as maintaining law and order in the city of Rome? And to whom did this entity answer? So I suppose a kind of what was the police force, as it were?
There is no police force as we would understand it. There is no kind of detecting of crime. If somebody's breaking into your house, there is nobody who you can call, which is quite scary when you think about it. So there isn't this kind of police force. What there is order. You have the urban cohorts who are based in Rome, and their job is to maintain public order. So they sort out riots and maybe a bit of crowd control at the amphitheatre and the circus. And similar for the Praetorians, they sometimes get on detachment to a bit of riot maintenance or whatever, but there's no police force as such. There's just maintaining the order. There's a law, obviously, um, but there is no crime unless you go and report it and make a case, and then it gets really complicated. So how most of it is sorted out, if somebody like steals your cloak or something, you maybe put an advertisement up asking for its return, or you might lean on your kind of client patron network to get it back again, or you might write out a curse tablet and curse them. More like, and that's probably the easiest route. You probably wouldn't go to any authorities. Things are kind of sorted out within communities. So there is no police force as such.
The closest thing I could find, or I was sort of aware of them anyway, was the Vigiles,
Mm,
who were more of a sort of fire department than anything else. But
yeah.
they offered something that wasn't quite a police force, but I perhaps came the closest to it in the absence of one, I suppose.
Well, they might be present if you were being mugged or something. They might bash your mugger on the head with a bucket, when they're fire buckets or whatever. But that's not their job, so they might quite happily leave you to it, especially if it's a fire they've got to go do. But
They might be the ones robbing you.
they might be the ones robbing you, indeed. Yeah.
There is a lot of focus on rulers in history, but what is a day in the life of a perfectly average Roman citizen? What is the most common job and the most common food? Well, I think we've covered the first part in the options. Food's a very good question, and as is what sort of jobs would you be doing?
So food for the poor, they get a grain dole, so bread is a key contingent of that. They would take that down to their local bakers who will make the bread for them, because where they're living in their apartment, they're unlikely to have any cooking facilities. But you get, yeah, kind of cheese, vegetables, sausage, those sorts of foods are available to the poor. Um, so, so a kind of mixture of that sort of thing. A lot of stuff is out of reach. Fish gets ridiculously expensive at one point. They have to pass kind of sumptuary laws on it when people are paying kind of 10,000 sesterces for kind of 3 mullet fish. So that's kind of out of reach of the poor. Um, Jobs, kind of the things you'd expect now. So your baker, your sausage maker, your barman, a perfume seller, someone who makes clothes, work in a laundrette, you sell fish. Maybe you're an astrologer, a bit more niche, or a sorceress, maybe, or a doctor, or a midwife, or the kind of jobs that mostly the kind of jobs that we all need now, firefighters, like we just discussed. Yeah.
We're ignoring the fact that there was obviously a large sort of body of slaves to do work.
Mm,
However, there were also opportunities for people to do manual work who weren't slaves. And I often thought, well, you spoke about Domitian, you said he did lots of building. If you're working in any form of construction,
mm,
from a labourer to someone who was an engineer or someone who was even more technical than that, you'd be employed a lot.
mm. There's a lot of it is slave workforce. Like famously, Colosseum was built by the slaves from the Jewish War. But yeah, and there's obviously labourers as well. It's yeah, and the slave situation's a kind of big problem for employment. A lot of emperors say, "Oh, I won't employ slaves. I'll employ citizens," and that makes them very popular. So yeah, there is that kind of contingent. But as we said, there is the kind of normal jobs you expect, and they're not necessarily slaves who are doing them. So there is work, but yeah, the kind of slave situation makes it a bit more difficult.
And the final question, what was it like for women in Rome? I imagine it was pretty grim for enslaved women, but what about those who were free-born?
It's marginally better than it is for women elsewhere in history. So Roman women can inherit, they can own property. We know from inscriptions that they own businesses like kind of brickworks and winemakers. We know from poetry, from the likes of Ovid and Juvenal and Martial, that they went out. They went out to the theatre, to the games, to the circus, to dinner parties. Um, Juvenal spends a lot of time in his sixth satire complaining about women. Yes, it's satire, so it's overblown, but for it to work as satire, there has to be some kind of truth there somewhere. And he complains a lot about kind of knowledgeable women quoting poets he's never heard of, women being up to date with current affairs, these uppity women who are advising their lawyers and having copious affairs all over the place. So they have a fair amount of freedom, but on the other hand, they can't vote, they can't hold public office. If they're divorced, the children will naturally go to the father, and they are appointed a male guardian who oversees all their financial affairs. Um, so there are ways out of that. If you have three children, you can lose your male guardian. But women are also kind of subject to harsher penalties under certain laws, particularly the adultery laws are very unfair on women. So they're still very much subjugated. They considered lesser. They don't have a public role in public life, but it's marginally better than elsewhere in history, is what you could say about it. So it's not great, but it's not quite as grim as it is elsewhere.
I came across a book a number of years ago, which I picked up from a charity shop, and I thought this one day is going to answer a question. And it was Women's Life in Greece and Rome. It's a source book by Mary Lefkovich and Maureen Fant. It's really interesting, has a lot of detail in there. And they've got a list of jobs that women had done, which was noticed, or noted rather, on funerary urns and inscriptions.
Mm. Yeah.
And it's difficult because some of them they can't always tell whether these were free women or these were slaves. See, sometimes you can kind of work it out. But these included jobs, as you've said, a teacher, fishmonger, grocer, hairdressers, musicians, secretaries, seamstresses. Hairdressers, as I've just mentioned, were really quite popular. And one that I think was largely slave, judging before I could work out, was wool weighers.
Mm.
So they had a lot of options, I suppose, in some sense, perhaps more than we might have thought they did.
More than you think, but yeah, they're not. Like you said, you've got a male guardian who's
Yeah,
overseeing everything you do. And depending on who that guardian is, that can be quite restrictive
yeah.
or not at all. We don't know. We don't know. These laws are there, but you don't know how much they were enforced. I mean, technically, women caught in adultery were all banished to an island, but then you think, well, where are all these islands? They, that they were getting banished to, it doesn't kind of make sense. So you're never quite sure how rigidly these things were enforced. But they certainly had a lot of freedom to go out the house. They weren't constrained to the house. But yeah, there's a societal expectation on them that they are chaste and they get married and they have children, and that's what they do. So that is kind of standard.
We're coming right to the end now, and I want to say thank you very much for coming on. Really, really been interesting talking with you. Realise we've covered a lot of stuff. Is there anything that you want to say now, or is there anything that you want to, anything you haven't mentioned, or any grand announcements you have?
I'd like to apologise for missing loads out of 69 AD, just because so much happens and you can't do it all. What I say? I could mention my next book, which I've just finished writing, which is another non-fiction, which is called Sex and Sexuality in Ancient Rome, which I'm definitely banning my mum from reading at least 2 chapters in, but that should be out in 2021.
How did you end up on that particular subject or subject material?
Again, after I'd written for Pen and Sword, they said, did I want to write another one, and gave me some titles, and I chose this one thinking, oh, that would be interesting. And it is an absolutely fascinating subject, and it's nice to write a good length book on just one subject
Yeah.
after writing kind of 50,000 words on like 14 different topics, which by necessity is quite general and not as in depth as you'd like to go. To just have like 80,000 words on one topic was quite a treat. Quite a treat.
You could have just retitled it #Phallus Thursday.
Fallacies do get mentioned. They do get mentioned.
I just want to again say thank you very much for being on the podcast and sharing all of your knowledge and insight with us. Until next time, take care. I'm not sure when the next podcast is be. I'm probably going to take a month off and be back in 2021, charged and raring to go. So thanks again to LJ Trafford.
I was going to say thank you for inviting me on.
And until next time, keep safe and stay well.